What's up, guys? We're going to be filming a lot of NFL videos for specific props that you guys like. And today we're going to be starting with rushing yards. And just off the bat, we could look at the props tab. We're selected on NFL on the top left. And you could kind of filter through what you want to see. So if we click this filter button right here, you could choose any games that you guys like specifically, or just don't click any games if you want to see all the props available. You could filter by sportsbook as well if you want a specific sportsbook's odds. You can also filter through minimum odds, over, under, and then lastly, alternative lines. We might be doing some same game parlay alternative line videos for you guys. I know FanDuel has a lot of that alternative lines for passing yards and receptions, whatnot. And a lot of other books are doing that now too. But for today, we're going to be looking at rushing yards. And you can look at opposition rank as the filter last 5. I'm selected on last 10 right now. And we're going to be going over, there's a lot of props that we're going to cover in these next series of videos. And we could look at rushing yards right here. And the player that I'm going to be choosing today to look over and show you guys the supporting stats is James Conner of the Cardinals. And we take a look over here. Conner's covered this line in 5 straight games we see off the bat. We could look at last 10, 2023, and all teams have played one game as of now, and 2022. So let's dive into it. Off the bat, we can see supporting stats right below here. And for now, I'm going to be looking at 2022 stats because we're not deep enough in the season to strictly rely on 2023 stats. I do like to look in this early of the season, 2022 stats, and I'll just go through my thought process while using these supporting stats. So off the bat, we could look at the rushing plays. They're averaging 25.8 rushing plays and 68.7 plays per game in 2022. And the stats that I really like are right here. Rush attempts. So he was averaging 14.1 rush attempts per game in 2022. And rush share is another really interesting one. So let's say that there was 27 rushing attempts. His rush share is just how many attempts he had overall. So in the last 2 games, for example, 56% rush share, 59% rush share. So the team had 27 rushing attempts total. And of those 27, 15 came from Conner. And we could keep going over here. Rushing yards per attempt. These are getting very specific. Longest rush, which is another prop that we might dive into in a future video. Yards after contact, which we could see, and broken tackles. And if we scroll even further down, we're going to look at the Giants rushing yards defense. And they rank 27th in the league. 27th. And we see that it's green, which means it's good for our props. So that means they allow a lot of rushing yards. They're one of the bottom teams in the league in defense. They're averaging 144.2 rushing yards allowed per game. And we can look at the line movement down here as well. And when we click the top 3 little chart tab right here, it's going to show us, we can look at specific little, without players, for example, little tabs over here, games without certain player. If you know that a player is out of the lineup or injured, games with certain players, which is really cool. Win-loss margin, and then what I like to do is the home and away games. So we see that he's playing at home in his next game. If we apply that, we see that Conner had 120, 85, and 79 rushing yards in his last 3 home games. And this season, he played 1 game. It was on the road. And what we're going to do here is kind of go through my thought process of how I like to choose props this early in the season. So since we're looking at a rushing yards prop, I do like to look at his rush attempts throughout last season because we do see that he really didn't cover the prop at all in the first few months of last year. And then he kind of started hitting it consistently in the latter few months of NFL. And we could take a look, and this really shows in the rush attempts. The first half of the season, Conner wasn't averaging many rush attempts. He had around 10 to 7 to 10. Some games, one game he had 15, and in that game he probably got very close to that. Yeah, he got 55 rush yards. And the rush share is a really cool supporting stat that I love to look at because if you look at a team's defense, for example, as we saw, the Giants are averaging 144.2 rushing yards per game. Obviously, that doesn't mean that every single team is going to get 144 rushing yards when they play against the Giants. It varies, obviously. But it's kind of cool to base off that and look at the rush share of James Conner, for example. If we take a look at the start of the season last year, He had a lot of games with under 50% rush share, some games with 25% even, but then in the last 8 or so games of last season, he had 50 plus rush share in every game, some games even higher, such as 81%, then 58, 74, and then these games he just crushed it. He basically was the entire rush offense in his last 2 games. And even in 2023, he had a 56% rush share in his first game, which is kind of a continuation of last year's trend. And you could just kind of go like, you know what, if Connor's averaging about a 56 or like a 60 plus rush share, and Giants have a 144.2 rushing yards allowed per game defense, that kind of points towards Connor hopefully going over if his rush yards, if his rush share stays similar. But that obviously isn't always exact. It's just something to look at. And we could also look at the matchup over here, take a look at all the injuries, a lot of guys that are questionable for the Giants. You could look at the exact reports, which Outlier updates frequently. And you could look at the Cardinals as well. And then you could also, once again, look at the defense. This is a more advanced defensive ranking. So for the Giants defense, we could look at that. As we saw with their rushing yards, they're 27th in the league, 144.2. You could look at red zone efficiency, scoring, first downs, and everything else, tackles for losses, sacks, turnovers, etc. And all this data points towards James Conner hopefully going over and continuing this trend. I think he's covered this line in 6 straight games, as we see. Make sure you guys subscribe to Outlier. Get your 7-day free trial on iOS as well. And hopefully you guys crush it this NFL season and use Outlier for all your sports betting needs. We'll see you in the future videos.